I'm Richard Stevenson, a Canadian poet now living in Nanaimo, and this is a piece called Loxosceles Tenochtitlan, and it's Latin for a new spider species. So I will just read the poem and then we can comment on it. Researchers in Mexico have discovered a new, extremely poisonous spider. One bite and your flesh begins to necrotize, rot, to put it bluntly. If you don't get medical attention right away, you could rot to death, or at the very least need to have a limb or part of one lopped off. Even with immediate medical attention, you'll end up with a nasty scar bigger than a silver dollar. Compare that to the 2 tiny holes a vampire leaves. Can't cover those holes with the collar. Don't want to wait for medical attention from some jungle or wilderness spot. You'll likely drop dead before any helicopter can get you to a hospital. Nope. No pretty corpse for you. No chance of becoming a zombie or vampire. Rearing up from your coffin, a pale-skinned, red-lipped revenant ready for round 2. Sorry. Scarfing flesh or sucking blood from some other poor victim isn't in the cards. You're worm food, dude. Pity the worm that burrows into your flesh is next in line to dine on what's left of you. Spidey likes to travel in style in ornamental plants too, worse luck. Pity your neighborhood florist. She nicely wraps a gift for your girlfriend or spouse and ouch! Gets bitten in the bargain. Christmas, holidays, anniversaries, the spider lies in wait, its fangs poised to deliver the punch. You won't be tippling anything soon. You won't be raising any glass to toast your mate. You're in a crate. I started out as a science major, believe it or not. I was a biology and chemistry dude. Somewhere around grade 10, it was kind of the height of the Vietnam War, and we were getting a lot of music in the rock and pop and folk fields coming out of that experience. And my teacher actually brought some Bob Dylan, Leonard Cohen, and Country Joe and the Fish records to class. And I remember writing an essay on Country Joe and the Fish's I Feel Like I'm Fixin' to Die. So I started writing protest lyrics for my locker partner who played guitar, and that sort of evolved into Bad Doggerel that I sent a girlfriend in Kamloops after I met her one summer, and it just went from there. I ended up switching my major in second year from biology to honors English because I thought, well, I better learn something about literature before I try and write my own. And that's kind of how it went from there. I also grew up next door to a beatnik who was a great mouth harp player, and all the kids used to listen to him tell stories in the big oak tree next door when we were kids. So I came by it honestly, I think. Storytelling was always in the cards. Okay, as it implies, it's about a discovery of a new spider. What I've been doing is I've been writing this series of books about cryptids, unknown creatures that may or may not exist, like Gogo Bogo Sasquatch, or quite simply monster poems, using the classic definition of monsters. There's seven points in the Random House College Dictionary. And I just play off of all of those. So they're all monster poems in one way or another, the thesis of which is that of all of monsters, real or imagined, to occupy this planet, clearly Homo sapiens is the worst, considering we kill species we haven't even named yet, all in the name of greed for whatever, resource we want to pull from the earth. So it's a book about the revenge of Eden, I guess you might say. With this particular book, I've come out of a long period of writing haiku, so I was naturally working with 3-line stanzas anyway. I didn't stick to the 5-7-5 modern haiku doesn't anyway, but it was very imagistic to start with. But what I would usually do is I would go to a source book on cryptozoology. That means, some people don't think it's a science, some people do. But it's basically the investigation of creatures for which there are lots of sighting reports, but no actual bodies or DNA to get it into Linnaeus's, categorization of species and whatnot. So I just started off with that. I would find an article on this spider, for example, and I started reading it. The next step that occurred to me is that I could use some phrase such as, research in Mexico have discovered, blah, blah, blah. And then just try and work my way into it. But I had to have a speaker, so it's in the form of a dramatic monologue. So the speaker is talking to an audience, and there is obviously a listener that is kind of looking, or here he's invisible, but he's the fly on the wall that hears the conversation, so to speak. So I would start off with the facts, and then I made the speaker a little more paranoid, and I made this spider a little more dangerous, and he is telling somebody what a monster this creature is. And so it fits in the book, and next to other pieces that are about various, monsters, big or small. You could think of the whole book as kind of like a cryptid bestiary with some E.T. and Fortean lore in between poems to make a contextual, sense of things. So the idea is if they are real or imagined, they could come from any one of a number of places where there hasn't been a human footprint or outer space or whatever. And part of it is lunatic and comic, obviously. I'm being kind of absurd. But the point that comes home loud and clear, I think, throughout the collections is this notion that human beings are destroying their own habitat without realizing they're doing it, Okay, well, it's going to vary with the poem, but I would think that I used to be the editor of Prism International when I was in grad school, and I would say one of the things that prevents people from getting their poetry published primarily is, A, if they're writing doggerel, in which case the language is out of step with the 21st century, and it's very hard to write metric verse without, putting some variation in there, otherwise it becomes rhyming doggerel. So I would say the first thing you need to do is you need to understand what a phonological phrase is. It's not a grammatical phrase. It's a group of words that could be, almost any length, but it's bound by two pauses on either side. So where you break the line is crucial. For example, if you take an ordinary prose sentence like, I'll do it when I have time, you've got a pause on either side called a phonological pause. And if you change that break, so you say, I'll do it when I have time, you'll notice that the accent falls on the word when then. So anything at the beginning or ends of lines has to be significant. You don't want to end the end of a line on a preposition, for example. The logical thing to do would be to break it before the preposition. However, notice how you could change the entire meaning of a sentence without actually doing anything to the word order. You just say, I'll do it when I have time. 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 You can hear the tone changing, right? So the first thing to do is to get control of that voice. Who's speaking? If the reader doesn't have a sense of a speaker, then I'd say you have to fine-tune the language a little bit to get it more colloquial and conversational. And then pay attention to all of the things that made metric poetry work. You still had alliteration and assonance and onomatopoeia and all of those different techniques where you can play with the sound. For example, if you wanted to create fear or a mood of fright or something like that, you might want to speed the line up. So if you use alliteration, you're going to speed the line up. If you use internal assonance of slows the syllables down, so that you. And so, with a combination of line breaking and throwing in these phrases and working with assonance and alliteration and other poetic devices, it reads as if it were conversation, but it has rhythm too, right? And it has music as well. If you don't have a musical line, you don't have a poem. You have a prose piece that is broken up into, broken sticks, essentially. And I find that's probably one of the most common things that I would find that would cause me to reject a poem when I was an editor, is no control over the phrasing or sound of the poem. Sound is really, really important, even if the lines get long. You have to have a sense of the speaker. You have to have a sense of somebody listening, at least in a monologue you do. The more you focus on image, the shorter the poem should probably be, because you don't have a narrative to carry it. You don't have a climax or any of the things that make prose work, So it's really about paying attention to your phrasing as you write. You're going to have to cut. I find it much easier to overwrite a poem and then cut than it is to add later. So my early drafts tend to be long, and then I say, okay, well, how much do I really need in this poem to make it work as a narrative or make it work as a lyric? And just get rid of all the extraneous detail as much as you can. Sometimes it helps if you let somebody else look at it. It helps if you read it aloud, because if you stumble, that's the first clue that there's something wrong, right? Okay. Yeah, well, I think one of the things that you should do is you should go to readings and listen to other people. So don't just restrict your reading to things that are text-based. You should probably pay attention to 17th century to the 21st century. Look at all of the stuff in between, and the metric poetry, syllabic poetry. They each have their own kind of music, even free verse. There's nothing free about it if you know what you're doing. So I would practice. I would go out and read in public at public readings. You got to get over your stage fright, and you got to be able to handle a microphone. So there's nothing that's going to teach you that but doing it. And the more you do it, the better you get at it. I happen to be a teacher for 30 years, so I have no problem speaking in front of a crowd. My problem is learning to shut up. First of all, the lines that are going to confuse you are lines that are probably metaphoric. That is to say, if they don't make literal sense, then they make figurative sense. And in what way? With a simile, you've got two halves of the equation. X is like Y. With a metaphor, you've got the structure of X is Y. So what you have to think of is, how is X like Y in some way? Metaphor is generally stronger than simile, and that's usually where readers get confused, because it doesn't make literal sense. So if you can sort out this, what I call the scaffolding, that is to say, the lines that carry the narrative, from those phrases or expressions or images that don't make literal sense, look for some kind of comparison in your mind, right? Oftentimes, if I say, for example, a green thought in a green shade, okay, so how is a thought green? Well, you associate the word green with things that are fecund, growth, nature. So in what way is a green thought a thought about fecundity, perhaps, or growth, or something along those lines? Green shade, in other words, it's probably late in the day because the grass is green, and you mentioned shade, so the sun is down over the yard arm or getting there. It's about the economy of expression more than anything. I would say that if somebody is trying to learn to write poetry, they should first try and learn to write haiku, because the demands on those less than 17 syllables is extreme. But it forces you to cut all the crap from your writing. And it also forces you not to talk about it. It forces you to recreate an experience on the page. I think that's a big issue You know, are you recreating the experience so the reader can have it, or are you talking about it? Talking about things doesn't tend to work, not even in prose. You know, people stop listening after a while. So you want to observe all the same kind of rules that you would with prose. You know, you want to create tension, you want to create interest, you want some kind of theme to emerge, you want it to become clear from the tone and the language what direction you're having. Because oftentimes a poem will convince us before we understand it. I'm thinking of a writer like W.S. Merwin. I mean, his work in the 70s was, you know, it changed the history of American writing. It's that important. But it was largely gnomic and metaphoric and symbolic. And he's since loosened up before he died. But, you know, every poet has his own way of encountering those problems and dealing with them, I think. So you just have to be prepared to make mistakes. You know, a lot of people won't take chances because they would rather play it safe, you know.